So this is probably a double dose of UL here. And I'm going to sort of follow up on some of the things that were mentioned earlier and maybe draw some topics would be sort of drawn back to sort of get a little more basic, but then also wanted to kind of open it up. And I don't know how much time we're going to have here, so I'll do most of the initial talking, but I want to have some space time at the end. If you guys have input, and this is what's beauty of having a face-to-face sort of session like this, is we got to talk to people instead of going through the virtual GoToMeeting or whatever we use today. And I thought maybe just an open discussion, if you guys can come up to the mic and ask questions or suggestions in terms of the work streams and the needs for understanding codes, understanding compliance and standards, so that could be part of the work stream, or in some cases it could be a separate work stream if it's critical. And I'll bring up some things, and there are some exciting things that happened today, so I'll talk about that as well. Some of that won't be in the slides, but I can sort of talk about it. So my name is Michael Sakamoto from UL. I'm the senior business manager, and we've been with Open Compute. This is our second year running, and very, very excited to be part of this community and looking forward to continue to contribute. So a couple things in terms of understanding of the codes here. First thing, obviously, and as mentioned before, the codes really achieve compliance to building, electrical, and fire codes. This is really what's relevant with the data center ecosystem. And what's really important is that there are code officials that come in and look around to provide inspection and at the end result, give you a permit, so then you can turn the system on, which is called commissioning. So these are things that happen, and especially when you have a new piece of equipment that they see something in this, in this data center that they're not familiar with. And this is really the situation that we have right now with immersion cooling. So you got to basically have equipment and operational permits. And then I think the terminology AHJ, some people are familiar with AHJ, some are not, but obviously it stands for authorities having jurisdiction. Those are the fire marshals. Those are the inspectors, the electrical inspectors that come in and they look around to see if everything's up to code. So again, that word code comes up. So now you go back and say, okay, then what do I need to know about codes? What is it that the facility people and even the equipments that are going to be installed in the facilities need to know about codes? So this is sort of where the codes come in. And I'll go through the difference between codes and standards in a bit here. And codes may involve not only the equipment, but a lot of the installation methods, handling, storage of chemicals, other facility-related requirements, fire suppression systems, right? All these kind of things they're going to be looking at. In fact, one of the interesting things I had when I was in the office and I talked to an ex-fire marshal, and he's part of UL now, and I showed him a tank, immersion tank, and I said, what's the first thing that you as a fire marshal would be concerned about this? And he first said, I want to see the material data sheet for the fluid. I want to know how that's being transported into the facility. I want to know how it's being stored. I want to know what kind of fire suppression, if it is adequate for any incidences that this fluid may cause. So obviously it was much more further away from just the equipment. He was looking at the facility and how this thing was coming in, what it is, and what it's capable of doing. So that kind of caught me off guard a little bit, and I said, okay, so there's a lot more things we need to realize as we look at codes and requirements in regards to standards. So that was sort of a kind of an eye-opener for me when I had that discussion. So it's sort of having preparedness to this and having understanding, and so this is why what we want to do is we want to bring some of these topics into the work stream and have it so that it's a discussion point. And one of the things that we like to do, at least from our background at UL, is we have the knowledge and expertise in some of these areas, and we would be able to contribute that. But just to take a step back, what is a code? You kind of like, what is a code? It's a set of rules that serve as an accepted guideline recommended for industry and or regions to follow, primarily for purposes of safety, quality, and other benefits. So the key thing is when we say a code, it's got to be the law, right? It's got to be regulatory. In most cases it is, but code on its own, it's not a law. It needs to be adopted. So in case of, I'll take an example, NFPA 70 is the electrical code, and everybody probably knows a little bit about that. There's a document. It's a big, thick book, NFPA 70, and basically it's the electrical code. Now, the states, individual states have to adopt it, but once it adopts it, it becomes a mandate. It's a rule, it's a law. And right now, in this case, in this country, at least all 50 states have adopted NFPA 70. Some regions, some states may add additional requirements on top of the NFPA 70 electrical code. But that's sort of how that works. So the code by itself, maybe a new code may show up and may not be required, but when the state, which is the jurisdiction of the code, adopts it, then it becomes a mandate and becomes a rule. So that's how that works. Now, what is the standard? The standard provides the process or the methods of meeting the code. It tells you how you do it, what you need to do in order to meet the code. So one primary standard that most of you may know in the data center environment is the IEC-based 62368-1. That is the biggest chunk of code that pretty much covers most of your data center equipment. So now these standards could be voluntary or they can be mandatory. And voluntary, I mean, it could just be hey, it's a good practice to do it this way. Or it may be something that you want to just, as a brand, do it because it's good for the brand. Or it could be mandatory. I mean, it's a regulation or government driven. Now, in some cases, and this may not apply in this audience here, but you may make a product and you want to sell it into, and you figure there's no rules for this. I don't have to certify anything to any standard, but you want to sell it through another agent, a customer. That customer who's going to handle your product for sale may require that you have to certify your product. And so in that case, it could become mandatory because in order for you to sell it, it needs to be done. It could happen in a data center where the facility owner may say, hey, I don't want to accept that product in the data center unless it's certified. So in that case, in your view, it becomes a mandatory requirement. So just some concerns. As I started to go through some of the project work streams and listen in, there are some things that I capture some notes. And some of them are like, are there current standards that cover immersion cooling systems? So that's a really good subject. So I basically looked at it, and sure enough, as Ettore just mentioned, 62368-1 has some basic requirements in there. But it is somewhat outdated. Many of you, if you looked at the requirements there, has realized maybe this needs to be looked at and needs to be updated and reviewed. And so what do we do, right? What are the industry recognized standards and required codes for immersion cooling? There are a couple, in this country, there are a couple NFPA documents that are codes. NFPA 70, NFPA 75, these are some of the standards. Now, Dayon sitting here in front, tomorrow you will be doing a quick presentation on NFPA 75 and 70, so that's under DCF, right? Yeah, DCF track. So if you want to get a quick view of some of these standards, he will be doing a presentation on that. What's the process for updating these standards and codes? And what's the involvement that OCP can provide in updating this code? So I have a new development that I just found out this afternoon. About maybe, I could say 7 or 8 months ago, as I was looking at this, I recommended that OCP become a liaison to the TC108, which is the organization that develops the requirements for 62368-1. Just today, I just got the notice that the IEC has accepted OCP to become a liaison to the immersion technology. So that could be a fairly significant development where now OCP can influence the future development and requirements for immersion cooling in the 62368 standard. Now, you could take that a step further and say that could be a step in for OCP to become a partner with the standard development committee, but also it's not just only immersion, it could go into other categories of the data center. So to me, it's a very significant happening that gladly, timing is perfect, right? That everybody's here, but, and I know Rolf was involved in this, and he was the person that signed off and says, we want to be a liaison, so that's come to fruition today. The other thing is NFPA 75. This is a fire protection for data center. It's a code that exists today. They are opening for comment until January 3rd. They want proposals and comments from the industry. What should be in? And one, I think it's clause or section 11.3 in that standard, they have a fluid or a immersion cooling sort of section, and it's so empty. There isn't anything in there. So they're looking for industry to sort of provide input. Now, you could be yours, as it could be part of OCP, formulating and suggesting and providing some input, or it could be yourself in your own organizations who might want to feel like you want to put in a proposal to the NFPA group. So those are two things that are going on right now that I think are pretty exciting in terms of getting the regulatory and compliance part of this business to sort of align and catch up in some cases. I call it more of a catch-up in some of these cases because immersion cooling just took off, and what's happened is the codes and the standards are sort of sitting there just kind of watching. But it's becoming a lot more harder as you try to install equipment in there, and the HJs don't understand what is being installed, and they start asking a lot of questions. So hopefully we can start to kind of have the organizations that manage these standards start catching up based on the input from OCP. So this is kind of where I wanted to sort of open it up for any discussion or comments or recommendations that any of you may have if you're in a project work stream, or if you want to join one and sort of provide some input to, hey, if we had some more of this kind of knowledge or information, or that would be really helpful for us in terms of what should we sort of prioritize as knowledge and information or activities in working with OCP and getting the activities up and ramped up in these areas and codes and standards. So, if you guys have any comments or suggestions, by all means, go ahead and step up to the mic and provide any comments. Otherwise, I'll be here today, tomorrow. I am going to be co-chairing the immersion cooling requirements work stream, so I'll be there. And I think my name and my email address has popped up before. So, yeah, go ahead and ping me. Or there are a couple other people. Kai Zhao is here. Dejan Gakovic is here, Ettore who just talked. These are all people that are very well versed in the compliance area. So if you have anything that you would want to ask questions or suggest or recommend that we bring to OCP as a talking point or a discussion, just please let us know, because we're sort of here to contribute, but we want to make sure we're contributing with the right things at the right time or the right subject, and not just wasting people's time for some other stuff. So that's kind of one of the things I just want to talk about today. So at that point, I'll just stop talking. If you guys have any questions or comments, let me know.